A U.S. wireless reporter who lose his vote 2 years ago will quickly back to the airborne, thanks to synthetic intellect. Jamie Dupree, 54, a policy wireless reporter in Cox print team, is incapable to say due to an uncommon neurologic state. A new vote was created for him by Scotch technique business SIR process. SIR process learned a neuron web to forecast how Mr. Dupree would say, with samples of production of his old vote recordings. Characteristically, in procedure to build a vote for who, the person as necessary to recite out a scenario for 30 several hours in procedure to collect quite information. Later synthetic intellect is attached to each cut-up speech of the sound folder and adhere them behind along on consumer demand, or the technique is utilized to forecast and simulate the man's speaking patterns. Both of these methods can price tens of thousands of pounds, and get a monthly to make fair one vote. To rate up the trial, and do it more than affordable, SIR process begun evolving its own neuron networks in 2006. Present, its synthetic intellect framework can produce a vote in fair a few days for £500. One day a customer has written themselves read the scenario on its website. The neuron networks, that include among 6 to 10 layers every, job by cutting sound recordings of speech downward to phonetics. The synthetic intellect framework slices every speech recite out by an person in 100 diminutive trimming, and does the in-lot of overall speech before ultimately it understands how main phonetics job in how man's vote and has an orderly succession for all the trimming in every speech. He's a lot more than decidable issue rather than car intellect. Mr. Dupree has been cover policy news story of convention in Washington, D.C. for the history 35 year. And as a reporter making substance for 6 wireless stations, his vote is significant to his job. He began loser his vote in 2016, but down there was anything incorrect in his vocals cords, neck or throat. Following enigmatic doctors of several big U.S. college hospitals, ultimately Mr. Dupree was undiagnosed in language bulge dystonia, a uncommon neurologic state wherever the language pushes striker out of his jaw and his neck tightens whenever he wants to say, manufacturing it unfeasible for him to say more than rather than 2 or 3 speech at a period. Quite rather than offer up his job, Mr. Dupree extended to do interviews in policymakers in convention with an e-writer pill to dog questions for A-to-A interviews, or by record the answers taking into account to groups of journalists in the Sinead House's hallways among hearings. Though he was yet written and making stories, he had substantially lost off the air fully, since he could not the stories he had spelled. The resultant print focus fueled his tenant to try to discover a way for Mr. Dupree to back to the airborne, with it had nearly 30-year cost of his wireless broadcasts on folder. Thanks to the machine-generated vote manufactured by SIR process, of Monday, June 25, ahead Mr. Dupree will one day once again be heard by WSB Atlanta listeners, as audiences of Cox print-owned stations in Orlando, Jacksonville, Dayton, and Tulsa. In his new vote, Mr. Dupree can now compose a scenario and later use a complementary lyrics-to-speech software program named Balabolka on his notebook to rotate it in and sound record. If a speech or rotate of sentence doesn't order in the record, he can sluggish specific consonants or vowels downward, or replace a speech to one how does job, or changing the tilt, and he can include a complete wireless history prepared to go dwell in FAIR 7 protocol. It is me, down there is no question on how, told Mr. Dupree. Affirmative, it is lightly robot, but not one was promise me how it was departure to be ultimate. In man, while speaking to household and associate, Mr. Dupree yet has to trust on the e-writer pill, or proverb a pair of speech slow, but the new vote has done a big distinction to his lifetime. "The is amazing," he told. "Written for my blog post, send out tweets and making Facebook is large, but down there is anything love cranking out a 20 other history sandwiched in a pair of audio bites to do the top of the time latest news."